Hey, welcome to another episode of Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, except my hand grenades a little bit need some work.
Well, the pin is missing, and frankly, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, about 2 seconds.
All right, it's going to be a quick show.
Hey, tonight we're talking about Fish and Game stuff. We have with us the Executive Director of Fish and Game, Glenn Normando,
Evening.
and the Director of New Hampshire Wildlife Federation, Rick Olson.
Oh, good evening.
Now, so you're only like a director. He's Executive Director. Who's like, who wins out? I
Well,
mean,
Glenn's a state agency. We're a nonprofit, New Hampshire Wildlife
well,
Federation.
he's a nonprofit too.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I think so frequently.
In fact, I think it's been going down on the red lately too.
It has a bit.
Yeah. Why don't we start off with allowing you to introduce yourself, how you got involved in this, and where your kind of a little bit of your history, Glenn.
So much to tell.
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in fish and game. My father worked there off and on for some years in his youth, and he was the director from 1988 to 1994. In sometime near the end of the 90s, early 2000s, I got asked to be the coastal commissioner on the Fish and Game Commission.
Wait, back up. Fish and Game Commission. A lot of people come to me as a legislator. They say, well, you know, you're the chairman of Fish and Game. You know, you should be able to do something about this or that. And I says, really, that's up to the Fish and Game Commission to set policy, not the legislature.
Commission is charged, and our commission is like many around the country, going back to the turn of the century when Teddy Roosevelt and all was really getting conservation going on off the ground, and there was an understanding that things had to be different. Commissions were charged by governors to run these agencies, which typically started as nothing more than a corps of game wardens. Really, the department, as we know it, more or less kicked off around 1935, and the commissioners were charged with overseeing the commission, with hiring a director that would run the day-to-day operations and whatnot. And over time, there's a lot of variables. Things have changed. In New Hampshire, the commission is charged with, among other things, dealing with overall policy issues as well as setting the department's position on legislation, for example. The director is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the department. The commission is responsible for doing a search for a new director and sending that name to the governor. The governor can decide whether or not to hire that person. When the previous director retired, Lee Perry, I happened to be, by then I was chair of the commission. And we did our due diligence for a director's search. We did interviews. We sent a name to the governor. The governor decided to not select that person.
Wow.
And
How'd that make you feel?
well, I'd anticipated at the time that I was at the end of my 5-year term, and I thought I would have done my duty and go back.
Go back to fishing.
Well, I had I had run my own marine construction business for a lot of years, and at the time was content to continue with that. And
Yeah.
But following numerous conversations with the governor, I kind of got. He decided he wanted me to do this job, so
Yeah.
somehow I sort of ended up being drafted into the position. So.
Well, it's good to be wanted. You know, I mean, that's good.
So I found myself further, about as far into the pot frying pan as you could get, as opposed to being, maybe going the other way. But
Yeah.
anyway, here we are. And so currently, there's a commissioner from every county, plus an additional commissioner from the Tidewater states that's supposed to represent the specific interests of saltwater, recreational, and commercial fishing, which is kind of obviously a little different than the rest of things. So
Yeah, yeah. So you have 6 commissioners.
we
correct?
have
6?
11,
11.
Wow.
10 counties plus
I'm
the
supposed to
coastal.
know this, by the way. I just
Oh,
screwed
really?
up really bad. Yeah.
Well,
And currently, we have the coastal commission is vacant, and which county is vacant? Carroll County is vacant at the moment also. But, and the terms are 5 years and they're staggered, so, since you got a commission as the head of a state agency, I became an executive director instead of a commissioner.
okay.
Thank you. Rick, how did you get involved in, what is exactly, do a sales pitch for your organization?
New
there, I guess.
Hampshire Wildlife Federation is a stewardship organization. It's an advocacy organization. Our primary mission is to advocate on behalf of sportsmen hunting, fishing, and trapping, and conservation as it pertains to hunting, fishing, trapping, and outdoor sports. Primarily, for example, one of the most recent projects we did is we worked with Chuck Miner from New Hampshire Fish and Game and Landowner Relations to establish we did a sign project so that signs were available to people that opened up properties that made them available for hunting, fishing, trapping. They could, it had verbiage on it. This property has been opened by the generosity of the landowner, made possible by partnership with New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, New Hampshire Wildlife Federation, Turkey Federation, and some of the other
Yeah.
organizations we partnered with. That's just one example. We specifically advocate for, we watch legislation pertaining to fish and game as it pertains to hunting, fishing, and trapping. We're limited in scope, though. We don't really get heavily involved with firearms issues, Second Amendment, and our scope is, it's broad within hunting, fishing, and trapping, but limited in that it pertains only to hunting, fishing, and trapping.
Okay.
And my own experience, I've been on the board now for coming on 4 years. I started out as just a board member, and then I was the treasurer for 2.5 years. We had some seats vacated due to the fact that some of our members had gotten elected to the legislature. So with the shifting, I'm now in
So
charge
they
of.
really wanted a pay raise.
Yeah, I wanted to pay raise. Yeah,
Nothing to $100, you know?
It's capitalism at work, right?
Exactly. But we work with a lot of the groups. We work with the clubs around the state, the sportsmen's clubs. We have a lot of affiliate clubs. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 or 70 right now. And we partner with them. And one of the important things that we do is we provide a voice for sportsmen. For example, this lawsuit we're going to be talking about, where we're making a concerted effort to put together a legal defense fund for landowners. We're getting out to the clubs and talking to clubs about why it's important to get behind the landowner, because in New Hampshire, 80% of land that we hunt, fish, and trap on is private land.
Right.
And so it's really important that we look to that interest and understand the implications of what this lawsuit could potentially do. And it's also very clear that people understand that, we need to really fulfill that role, because Fish and Game is still a state agency and they can't get involved. But like I told one person the other day, as I said, just because they can't get involved as an agency doesn't mean the people within that agency don't care. They feel very concerned about this issue.
Oh, yeah, well, it's
And-
not just them. I mean, yeah, that kind of segues into one reason I wanted to talk. And one reason I have Rick instead of just Glenn is you can actually openly talk about this, whereas Glenn's hands are tied, the director's hands are tied in a lot of ways as to what. Is that correct?
Not just myself, but any agency head in the state is actually subject to dismissal for involving that agency or taking sides in a civil lawsuit. You
Okay.
cannot, a state agency head cannot defend a private individual in a civil suit.
Okay.
Okay.
So you have to be very careful about what
You
you
have
say.
to be very
Yeah.
careful. I mean, that's the judicial branch, not the executive branch. There's a judge. You know, as I've told people many times, I mean, the only bar exam I've ever taken had nothing to do with legal issues. And
You passed, though.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
but so this is an area that from our point of view, the suit is the suit, and whatever the results of that suit are is what it is. We're just simply concerned with the consequences of the fact that someone did sue. I mean,
Right.
to my knowledge, nobody's ever successfully completed this kind of, or got anything out of this kind of a suit in the state, but people were under the sort of mistaken impression that because of the laws we do have, you couldn't be sued. And that's not the case. Even in Maine, where the loser has to pay, you can still be sued.
Sure, sure.
You can't prevent people from trying to sue you.
Right,
No,
yeah.
It'd be almost unconstitutional for them to be prevented from seeking, what do they call it?
Restitution? or-
Restitution.
Restitution
harm
and
done.
redress.
Yeah.
So,
But anyway, so let's just, for the viewers out there that don't know about the lawsuit, what has basically happened, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I very well could be, was this last year or earlier this year?
2009.
November of
2009.
2009.
A guy went out and used a gentleman's land, climbed up a tree stand to allegedly shoot coyotes, and the tree stand wasn't in decent working order, and he fell down and he hurt himself. He broke his crown, and now he's suing the landowner for damages that he received from falling out of that tree. The
Right.
legislature, I don't know how long ago, I don't know if I was in when we did that, but we passed a law years ago, because this isn't about hunting, by the way. This is about hunting, but it's also about everything else. For instance, landowners let people go pick wild berries on their land. Landowners let people go hiking through their land, from snowmobiles to, there's a lot of things that landowners in New Hampshire have been very generous about letting people use their land,
Yeah.
under the stipulation that the state has said, if you're using the landowner's land to go hunting or pick berries,
Almost any recreational use.
any
Yeah.
recreational use, if they open up that land, they're not liable for what happens to you on the land. If you trip over, like I think anybody that's been out in the woods, we always see this old rusty barbed wire or something like that. If somebody trips over there and off of that and cuts their leg open, that's their own responsibility, not the
Yeah.
landowners.
Right.
And so this fellow from Manchester, correct?
Correct, yeah. He's
Has
from Manchester.
suing the landowner for being up in this guy's tree and falling out of it.
Right. Well, what happened was there's two different stories. He went on the land. The plaintiff asserts that he had permission. He had a discussion and a conversation with the landowner. The landowner says, "Oh, by all means, you can hunt, and I'll let you hunt here as long as you shoot coyotes." So that's the basis that the attorney brings the suit under the exception in subparagraph 3, where he's calling that specific consideration. In other words, he was benefiting because the shooting of coyotes was the consideration. As long as he shot coyotes, he would get to hunt. He's also stating that the landowner gave him permission to use the tree stand. He states that in his pleadings that are filed in the Hillsborough County Superior Court. On the other hand, the landowner denies knowing the person, ever meeting the person, or ever having a conversation with the person.
Huh.
So there's a divergence of, who's saying what, who's telling what.
Now, the landowner, typically if you want somebody to come on your property to kill coyotes, it's usually somebody who's got sheep or animals that the coyotes are potentially attacking. What motivation would this person have for having somebody on there to kill coyotes?
That's just the thing. He doesn't have any livestock. You know, he uses his own land for his own personal. He's an elderly gentleman with Parkinson's disease, and
The defendant is?
no, the
the plaintiff?
landowner.
Yeah.
The landowner, the
defendant.
defendant.
The defendant, yeah,
that's I got mixed up.
That's okay.
He didn't pass the bar either, I guess.
Apparently not. Well,
So
but I bet he passed the
basically,
other exam.
Yeah.
there's this tree stand out there, and it's not even a manufactured tree. It's a homemade tree stand. You know,
Okay.
I actually went out and it's still up there. I went out and looked at it, and examined it, and took some pictures of it and whatnot. And so you have this landowner. He hasn't hunted in 30 or 40 years. But he's never posted his land, and he's always allowed people in that his land is open, they can go on and hunt. Generally, New Hampshire land is considered open to hunting unless otherwise posted. It's always a great idea to try and make contact with a landowner and try and get permission or let them know that you're hunting. But in the cases where, for whatever reason, if the land is open, you can hunt on it. That's
Right.
presumed. So.
Or you recreate, it does,
Right,
not just
recreate.
hunt, but almost any non-motorized use is allowed
Okay.
that doesn't damage the property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to take a motorized vehicle, you need written landowner permission unless you're on a state-approved trail. But,
Okay.
but whether that's, hunting, fishing, hiking, looking at birds, blueberry picking, there's no, it's just a wide variety of activities that are allowed and are covered under this law that we have for protection.
Yeah.
So that the public can use private land unless it's expressly posted, which is exactly the opposite of the way many states have it.
Really?
In many states, especially out west, it's considered trespassing if you're on someone else's land without permission, whether it's posted or not.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to where we came from, Old England, where it all belonged to the king,
Right.
and the rich people had the land, and all of us peasants
Yeah.
were not allowed to be on the king's property or take the king's game, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a lot of interest in making sure that a few wealthy or landed individuals could not keep all the people
Huge
Yeah.
parcels of land from everybody.
Yeah.
from
getting on
all
it.
the people being on it,
Right.
and the game and all, and it kind of goes to what's now called the public trust.
Yeah. Well, I would think practically speaking, too, I've never hunted, but I would assume if you're a hunter, it'd be very difficult if you're wandering around looking for deer or whatever to try to know where, whose land you're on and where does this person's property end and
It
someone
can be
else's
very
begin.
difficult.
So,
I
yeah.
mean, unless you want to go to the town halls and go over all the tax maps and
Yeah.
and deal with all of those sorts of things. And I mean, if a place is particularly attractive to you, as Rick said, we certainly advise people that it's always nice to get permission, and it just as a matter of common courtesy.
Sure.
But again, we're not always talking about small lots here. I mean, a lot of the land up in the North Country is privately owned, but it's privately owned in 5, 10, 15,000 acre chunks by mostly they're land investment companies, logging companies, and whatnot now.
Sure.
But and you wouldn't know where to start, or
Right.
the regular guy, and most of them don't have a problem.
You're gonna have to get closer.
Yeah,
to
you're
the-
way far away.
Most of them don't have a problem, letting people use those properties.
Sure.
Although now, they're kind of running a little skittish, and we're trying to reach out to them and calm them down and say, hey, you know,
We're working on it.
don't. The law we've had has worked really well for a long time. So don't. I've been telling folks to just, you know, try to hold your water a little bit,
Yeah.
and we'll see if we can stiffen it up to make it even less attractive for anyone to try to bring suit on it. But
Right.
before we abandon all hope here, let's
Yeah.
just take a breather and.
You don't need a mass overreaction to one incident.
Exactly. One incident that's a long way from actually having any kind of resolution.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the,
Yeah, the other thing too is a lot of people don't know is that, you know, the revenue Fish and Game gets from hunting and fishing licenses, if let's say if all this land closed down, would Fish and Game would be hurt?
we
probably.
would be hurt.
But the other industry that would be really hurt in New Hampshire is, which actually makes more than Fish and Game, is the people who come up here just to look at wildlife and bird watch, go hiking.
The economy would take a hit.
Economy would
economy,
take
the
a
economy of New
serious
Hampshire
hit.
would get really toasted.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge percentage of our economy is tourism.
And especially in North Country, they've got enough problems.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know the issue, the problems you run into is that a lot of these what are now land investment companies, run by, you know, out-of-state management operations, are just extremely liability shy, and so. You know, the minute they hear a breath of it, because their only purpose is really to make money for their investors.
Right.
So they and you know they're not. It's not like the old days of brown paper when one company owned the whole North Country and they had
Right.
kind of a paternalistic look at how they manage, and they manage their forests with 100-year timeline in mind.
Sure.
You know, these folks are there to make some money for their investors and this and that, and anything that they're willing to go along and help out and be a good citizen.
Unless
As long as
gonna
it's
cost-
easy, but if it starts cutting into the bottom line, then
Right.
they're really not all that interested in
Right.
it. So,
So anyway, we should probably talk a little bit about some of the. I know we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago. Then I think last week.
we had a meeting last week, and I believe next Thursday, I
The 8th or
think
something?
the 8th. I
Yeah.
think it's at 10 o'clock, 10 or 10:30. Representative Chandler and Senator
Andy Sanborn.
Andy Sanborn. We're going to have a press conference over at the LOB, and just to let people know and get the word out that this isn't something that's being ignored. You know, we're dealing with it. We expect to be able to do something in this legislature, and
Well, one of the things we're discussed dealing with it is like Rick was saying, the part of the problem is in the law. It said that, and for good reason, it said that, you know, if you open your land, as long as you're not getting compensated for people coming on your land to do something, then you can't be sued. And that's reasonable. For instance, a ski area, they are letting people on your land, they're making money off it, so they are liable.
Right. Right.
Okay, or if you were letting them on for apple picking and you haven't cleared out those barbed wire fences and they get hurt, they're liable. But if there's no compensation, they're not liable. That you're letting them go on there, it's, you know, hiker beware, so to speak. In this particular case, this guy said that the landowner had asked him to get rid of coyotes, and he's saying that that is just compensation. So
Correct,
we're going to
yeah.
try to rewrite that so it's a monetary compensation, so that somebody comes on your land to pick berries and they make you a blueberry pie or a berry pie, and you get hurt the next time. You say, "Well, I've been giving them pies, and that's compensation."
Yeah.
No.
Right. Right.
well, and actually the actual word used in the statute is consideration.
Okay.
Giving them a
Consideration,
consideration, which has got some.
It's a little ambiguous.
Well,
It's a term from contract law.
yeah, it's really something that you know, that's one area that we do hope to work on.
Yeah.
And we would also, I don't know if we can get to it immediately, but, you know, there's the whole issue of tort reform, which is a much bigger thing than this.
Yeah.
One case, but in Maine, in their law that protects property owners, there is actually a loser pays clause. So if you bring suit and lose, you know, the judges are required to have the loser pay the legal fees.
Sure.
That idea has not gained a lot of traction over the years in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
But we'll see if we can maybe move that ball down the road. a
It
little
seems
Right.
like a lot of times the legislature isn't motivated to change things unless something like this comes along where you have an actual legitimate example of, you know, if this were to go through and be successful, the amount of harm that would do to the New Hampshire economy would be pretty profound. So maybe we can,
I mean, I think in my view, for this to be successful, there would probably be things that come out in the court case itself that we're not aware of, that would, you know, based on just the quick and common understanding of what went on. But it's just the idea that someone might have to pay an attorney to defend him, even
Yeah.
if there was no chance of winning, that's got people worked up.
Right. Right.
yeah,
And,
and if that same landowner knew we might get the money back if it was a frivolous lawsuit, I think it'd be less
Exactly.
apprehensive too.
Yeah, that's where we come in. New Hampshire Wildlife Federation, we put together a legal defense fund.
Good. Good.
And that's, you know, the intention, you know, we're a pretty optimistic bunch. We think this is going to get kicked at summary judgment level. That's how
Yeah.
we feel about it.
Yeah.
But
Now,
still,
you've been
there's,
through all the court records too.
I have been, yes. Yeah, I go there on about every 2 weeks and look at the record, see if anything's changed, see if there's any new filings or pleadings or anything. And I haven't gone down. I heard the answers were in the file. I got to go down and look at those. But basically, I'm a big proponent of the loser pays, because I mean paying the fees and costs because I mean the statute clearly states no action shall be maintained, and you know, if a person's going to bring a suit, I think in this context it's fair that if they're going to lose, they're going to pay the owner for his aggravation.
Well, the court system gets so jammed up with frivolous lawsuits. It's, you know, anything to combat that, I think, is probably a good thing.
Yeah, was I talking to you earlier where no, it was somebody else, another legislator from Francistown. And he was saying things like this, it's like, well, you know the lawyer defending the landowner is making money. The lawyer prosecuting it is making money. The judge is making money. So that's why you don't have tort reform.
Right.
Yeah, well,
There's a lot of money to be made
Yeah,
out of even frivolous lawsuits.
The whole
well,
industry,
I wouldn't really want to guess at a count as to how many lawyers are in the legislature, but I can.
Actually, that's one of the cool things about New Hampshire, is the percentage is actually pretty low comparative to, you know, you got lowlifes like me that can run for office. So, you know what I mean? You don't have to have like this past election. I spent $25 for re-election. You don't
Nice.
need a boatload of money to be a state legislator in New
Yeah.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be
Yeah.
a lawyer and have. And the thing, we shouldn't really badmouth lawyers. I mean, it's a shame that we allow that 90% of the lawyers to impugn the integrity of the other 10.
That's right.
You know,
10? Is that many? 10%? Or 10 lawyers? Do you mean 10 lawyers?
Probably 10 lawyers.
Yeah.
10 lawyers, yeah.
Anyway, I think we've talked about that. I wanted to get you guys on, talk about that specifically, because it is important that landowners do know that we're trying to do something. We're not, you know, sitting on our duffs and not worrying about it, because it is really, really important.
Sure.
But I wanted to go over some other things. Not really that specifically. I wondering if the director has any. What's new and exciting on the upcoming hunting season? Any new laws that we?
Well, this year we're in the sort of the middle. We generally set the big game season's every other year, and so this is the middle year, and so there hasn't been hearings and whatnot. Things are pretty much running along as per normal, and we don't have. I don't think we have anything. You know, we had a middle of the road winter last year, not super harsh. Although, well, I shouldn't say that. It was pretty harsh in the far north, but ski country and north of that. But you know, we've got a decent deer herd. We've got a decent, you know, all our big game animals are in decent shape.
Yeah.
Small game is an ongoing issue because we simply don't have the habitat we had 30, 40 years ago. You know,
Really?
the dairy farms are largely gone. Things are developed. You don't have the fields and the edges and all the sorts of things that, you know, rabbits and grouse and whatnot really thrive on, or not nearly as much as we used to. And basically, small game is habitat driven. I mean, we can control, you know, I mean, in fact, deer and, as you've heard, bears and whatnot can work or interact with people and still thrive,
Sure.
whereas some of these other things that are habitat driven, notably grouse, can be tough because of the habitat they need.
Yeah.
It just isn't around.
I know what the difference when I, probably should admit this, but I moved up to New Hampshire from Massachusetts 26 years ago. When I used to go hunt with my dad down in Massachusetts, there was a lot of pheasant all over the place. So is that just because there's so much fields and
Well, pheasants are an open, they need open, and I mean big open. I mean, they're originally from Asia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, pheasants were brought to this country and to Europe and England and all from Asia. China, northern China, they're basically a bird of wide open plains and the steppes over there. And that's why they thrive in this country in places like, you know, North and South Dakota, Iowa. People are under the impression that the reason we don't have pheasants other than the ones we stock is because they can't handle the winters, and that's got nothing to do with it.
Really?
They can be as tough as nails when it comes to winter, but they don't roost in trees. They need ground. They need thick ground cover. They need lots of seeds and grains to survive. They can't live off eating buds off of trees like a partridge can.
Yeah.
And in the kind of woods and more woods that we have now, they're even more vulnerable, you know, because they're in the ground, they're in the woods. We got coyotes, we got foxes. They're very efficient hunters. We did used to have a little carryover back in the good old days when there was a lot of dairy farms around, but again, there's probably not a whole lot of the ones we stock make it through.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's been tried many times to raise grouse in captivity, but they just don't cut it. They're too wound up, too nervous, too flighty. They just they can't get them to breed, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you know, pheasants are the bird of choice, and of course out in the Midwest and even up into Pennsylvania and New York with large, there are wild populations that get augmented by stalking in some areas, but our birds are primarily stocked.
Yeah, I see very, very few when I go out. Of course, with my eyes, that doesn't mean much anymore. But
Well, when I was a kid, you'd occasionally see them running around in the summertime, you know, and you probably, but when I was a kid, there was a lot of dairy farms still around.
Yeah.
You know, in the 60s and early 70s, and now it's just not the case. There's very few working dairy farms left around our way. A few, you know, some in the Connecticut Valley,
Yeah.
River Valley, but You know, it's just a changing, we've become a very forested state, and it's just not what they can survive in.
I was, one of the funniest stories I've heard in the legislature, I don't think you told me anything, I think it was Eric Stahl. He was a fish cop from up north, that's what he called himself, fish
Yeah.
cop. He was in the Fish and Game Committee when I was a freshman. Really, he's a really nice guy. And I think it was he that told me this, but it was about a woman called Fish and Game and asked if they could come and put a deer crossing sign out in front of her house. And they said, well, why do you want that? So the deer can cross while I'm sitting on my porch. She was so ignorant of it.
Wow.
She thought if you put up a sign, the deer would cross at that, you know.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
She sure gives the deer a lot of credit.
yeah. She gives the deer a lot of credit. But anyway, I'm just thinking of that today. One of the questions I get a lot is the deer herd in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have asked me, why is the number of deer, the percentage of deer killed per hunter, I guess, is much lower here or perceived to be than elsewhere.
Well, the deer numbers in terms of the the deer kill, we're having our highest deer kill numbers right now. I mean, these are the good old days. The deer kill had deteriorated down to 3,200 animals in 1983.
Why?
Basically because of lousy management, because in those days the seasons were set by the legislature. So it was a big political football, and so for years and years there was a month-long season, 2 month-long seasons. There was a north and a south section,
Yep.
and it was either sex statewide with guns, and everybody would hunt the south season and then run, for a month, and then go to the north and hunt the north season, and eventually that got beat down, and then finally the Fish and Game Department in the mid '80s got the authority to do all the season setting, and and started doing a more scientific management of things, and however, New Hampshire will never be, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Indiana. We don't have the soils to support the feed that those deer just they're just in feed heaven down
Really?
there between the native plants, the nut trees, the agriculture, and then the other component is the winter. We can do, I mean, in a perfect world, we could simply say, okay, for the next 2 years, we're not going to hunt does at all. Okay, and you'd have, if you were in Pennsylvania, you could double your deer population. But here, depending on how the winter is, you could easily, the deer you think you saved, you can easily lose 40, 50, 60% of those in the winter.
Okay.
Or even more if it's really bad. And we have had some severe winters, especially in the north. Maine had 2 winters in a row that their deer herd away from the coast has just had the bejesus knocked out of it because of those winters, and they still haven't recovered yet.
Is that all from global warming?
Can't get going on that.
So the just the nature of where we are, and the fact that we're not in the agriculture business in a big way the way we used to be, which again, deer, like most things, like that successional habitat is more than, this mature forest.
Sure.
It has just translated into the fact that our land doesn't support as many animals as other places, and of course you have two things going. on now. I mean, it used to be, when I was a kid, a big deal to fly somewhere. Now nobody thinks about, flying somewhere to go hunting or to do anything else, so people
Right.
have a much broader experience.
Oh, okay.
The other thing is, never used to be other than American Sportsman, when you never saw these hunting shows and stuff on
Right.
TV. Well, what's missing a lot of times is the fence in the background.
Yep.
But everybody, you watch all of these shows and you'd think, well, geez, every place else in the world has, everywhere around the corners a buck like this.
Right.
And when I was a kid, I mean, you thought you'd had a season if you saw a track.
Yeah.
And we are so we've kind of gotten attuned to this instant gratification sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then so you have that, and then thirdly, we got one other issue, which is to grow a herd means sacrificing opportunity. So, you have a lot of people that want a bigger herd as long as, it doesn't cut out what they do.
Right.
So, when we have these deer hearings, for example, and we've got, 50, 75 people in the audience, things get pretty rowdy occasionally because, everybody's arguing, we want more of this, we want more of that, but, well, I shouldn't have to quit bow hunting for
Right.
deer this year.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Politics is everywhere.
Well,
Everybody's got
politics
their
is
own little
everyone
political
has an
agenda, yeah.
opinion.
Yep.
And we do the best we can to listen to what people want and combine it with what the science is saying
Yeah.
we should do. I mean, we are managing now to grow the deer herd in most of the state except the Seacoast, Unit M. And if you look at the our seasons and what you can take in those units, you'll see that a lot of units, there is little or no doe hunting during the gun season, and the idea is to basically to have more deer, you need to let does survive.
Yeah.
And but again, we run into this issue of you have a tough winter and you can lose everything you think you saved.
Yep.
So it's it's always been the case. New Hampshire has always, we have healthy deer herds, but it is not going to be like Pennsylvania. You're not gonna round the corner like I have in Pennsylvania and see 90 deer crossing the dirt road in front of
Yeah,
you. That's
yeah.
just not going to happen in this state.
Our deer are smarter too because they can read those signs.
Yeah, that's true.
So they can evade it.
And the other thing too is we have to also take into consideration that while the sportsman's paramount, there are other social issues involved with we have all sorts of problems with the herd we have, with agriculture, with people's flowers, and of course they want to do everything except let someone hunt. So,
Right.
so they expect us to, somehow, move these deer to other places and all. It gets a little carried away.
The other thing too about hunting here in New Hampshire, I mean, there's a reason they call it hunting.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do, especially in this state. If you go out and you get a deer, one of two things has happened. A, either you've gotten lucky, or B, you've done the hard work, you've put in the time to do the scouting and figure out where they're moving, and you've taken the deer.
Yeah.
And those that do the latter, it's more rewarding. The ones that get lucky enough to get the deer, they go out there and, oh, here comes a deer. That happens maybe once in every 6 years, if that.
Right.
But, like up until a couple of years ago, I was averaging 1 to 2, and some years 3 deer. And
Were you
They're-
tree stand hunting?
tree stand hunting, I'd get one with a bow, I'd get a special deer archery, and I'd get one with a muzzle loader.
Yeah.
So, that not too recently, but several years ago, I was doing that. And well, now that my daughter lives down in Pennsylvania, I've been hunting down there, doing my part to give the herd here a break. But, you know,
We don't care as long as you just buy a license.
I buy the license because I still shoot the coyotes out of the club, so.
Oh, yeah, that guy that did that, he didn't even have a license.
He did not have a
Really?
hunting
Why
license.
wasn't, wait, can't we,
Well, that won't help him in court.
no.
Well,
Well-
if I understand correctly, he did not have a weapon.
Really?
That's correct. They were scouting, and he went up in the tree to scout, and
Oh.
they did not have a weapon at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, so the license doesn't come into play then?
Yeah,
there was
and
more
it was-
than one?
He was with some buddy, and there's only I believe we only have a 12-month statute of limitations on like game violations
Really?
like that. So I don't. We
Can't do anything.
can't do anything
Yeah.
after the fact.
See, now it's scouting, because if you go to the court and you read the pleadings says he was hunting.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I understand. Again, I'm not, you know, that's just why I say, I've told everyone, I says, you know, wait to see what comes out,
Right.
because, you know, who knows whether it could get thrown out right away, or against what everybody thinks, there could be some nasty surprises in the depositions that change the way people think about the
Yeah,
thing, and I just think, you know, I'm just staying out of it. So.
Yeah.
So, bear season's coming up,
Yeah, starts tomorrow.
starts tomorrow. Anything new on that?
The bear season is pretty well set. We certainly have a good supply of bears in the state, although the number of bears that get taken every year depend a lot on what the natural food sources are doing. So if you have a good mast year with lots of acorns and beech nuts and whatnot, and that are up in the deep woods and in the mountains, and then you tend to see a big decrease in the bears taken, because they're not as susceptible to bait, they're not as susceptible to coming out into the cornfields. If those natural foods are in short supply, then they're out foraging, trying to fatten up for the winter.
Yeah.
So they're,
In the old days, you used to get them at the dump.
yeah, right.
Pittsburgh Dump, I guess, is the place to go, wasn't it, to watch bear?
Yeah, it used to be. I think Berlin had a bigger Gorham or someplace up there.
Okay.
But the success in the bear season frequently gets determined by what's going on with the natural food sources, because they have to, if it's slim, they have to travel further. They're foraging more. They're exposing themselves more. Like I say, more susceptible to baiting and this and that. Whereas, you know, if they can have a fat and happy spot that's up in the middle of nowhere, and of course, I don't know if you ever tried to drag a bear, but they don't drag.
I actually
So-
never have. So,
Yeah. So they.
Gary?
No, not.
It's
not-
like
not
trying
this
to
Yeah.
pull a 250-pound jelly ball with hair, and so again, people tend not to get way into the backcountry bear hunting.
Yeah.
And therefore, when the food is good way back in there, you know,
They're pretty safe,
they're pretty safe,
Yeah.
or safer.
safer.
But still, we've had record and near record numbers taken over the last few years. I think last year the bear kill was around 700 animals, 707 or something like that, which is a very good year for New Hampshire. But because of this food issue, we actually look at bears over a 5-year averages rather than worry about a single spike where we think too many might have been taken, because it's just
So it's like the stock market, really. You try to go in for the long haul, not for the short gain. is
yeah,
what you're saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We estimate, I think we have around 7,000 bears in the state, or somewhere in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, I don't think I still have not seen one of those in the wild. Of course, I don't see a lot in the wild.
Have you seen a stock trader in the wild?
No. But if I see a now, can we open up? Is it possible to open up hunting season for lawyers? 'Cause I think that would
The 90%.
the 90%.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
90%,
Thin the
giving the
herd.
other
Yeah.
10% a bad name.
Then the
Yeah.
herd a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
You know, before you go too much further with that line, if I'm not mistaken, the speaker's a lawyer, Speaker of the House.
oh, you
Awkward.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, you know, it was funny. It was St. Patrick's Day. Before the House session, we have a Republican caucus where we get together and try to decide, you know, what's going on as a group. And it was St. Patrick's Day, and I was down near the well in back of the speaker there talking. I asked him, I said, you know, it's St. Patty's Day. Am I going to have time to, you know, tell a joke today? He says, well, does it? Because he's, you know, O'Brien. He says, is this going to shed a positive light on the Irish? I said, not particularly.
Yeah.
He says, I don't see any time opening up for that. He's actually a pretty funny guy.
The you know, another thing about wildlife is the biggest pet peeve. Like I was out on Sunapee a week ago. Mm-hmm. You know, I have my bird dogs out there going off the boat, and there's these. We're at the sandbar. This place in Sunapee. It's real shallow. The boat's all moored there, and everybody swims, right? So I'm out there with the dogs, and there's these ducks hanging around. I call them the Sunapee bums, because they come over to the boats and they beg for food.
Yeah.
You know, and it aggravates me because people feed them. You know, and what I would say to viewers: stop feeding wildlife. Do not feed wildlife. You're not doing them any favors.
Right.
Right.
You know, feeding wildlife is a bad thing.
Bird feeders in the winter are fine. Other than that,
Really.
stop.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah, because yeah. What time? Bears are really more likely to start attacking feeders in the spring, correct?
Right.
Yep.
Because when they come out of hibernation, they're hungry.
And
And
they
s-
want everything and anything.
Right, and they love, like, you know, I mean, bird seed is loaded with oils, fats, you know, so they just scoop that stuff right up. They just love it.
They love picnic baskets too, right?
Suet, yeah.
Hey, Yogi.
Picnic basket.
That's about as much as I know about this
Yeah.
stuff.
So that, you know, to them, bird feeders are easy pickings.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, you know, when the snow's going, you know, when March rolls around, it's time to start picking up anything you've been putting out because,
That's interesting. Most people that probably doesn't occur to them.
well, we really push it and
Yeah.
push it and push it, and we get pushed back, and it's like, because the thing is, when you habituate a bear to feeding around houses, you're really on the way to giving that bear a death sentence, because once it's habituated to that, and we literally will watch sows train their cubs to do the same thing.
Really.
And, you know, so they get bolder. The next thing you know, you got a housebreaker on your hand, and you got to
yeah.
put it down.
Yeah.
Because those bears will come back. You can't just throw them in a box, take them 50 miles, let them out, and think you're all done with it. They've
Right.
learned that behavior, and they're not going to stop doing it.
Right. Right.
And, you know, we have a public safety responsibility. And you know, you get a bear, it's not trying to attack somebody, but it gets in a house, and it gets scared when somebody scares it in
Sure,
the house, and it's
sure.
going for the door, and you're in the way.
Right.
You know, they are immensely strong.
Yeah.
You're just something that you know, we've had you know, we had an incident up in Center Harbor, Sandwich, Tuftonboro area. A little while back, that was in the paper where this woman got mowed down on a porch by one.
No kidding.
Bruised her, no serious injury, but
Yeah.
I mean, those are the sort of things that, you know, we had the guy last year in North Conway. They hadn't locked the dumpster. It was a bear-proof dumpster, but it was left open, or the lock was broken or something. The bear was in the dumpster, and he went to throw something in, and the thing reached out, and
Oh wow.
he ended up with 70-something stitches across him from the claws.
Wow. You don't expect that when you're
And
throwing something away.
Right, and again, the bear just getting scared and is trying to get out of there, and that guy was in the way, you know.
Wow.
And so, you know, you really people that consistently feed these things are well. The incident in up in Center Harbor, a neighbor had been feeding that bear for several years,
Yeah.
and then they moved.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, in that instance, you got a bear that's coming around going, "Where's my food?"
Right.
yeah, right.
And it's mad because it isn't there because these people are gone.
Right.
And so this was the next door neighbor's house, next target, and again, a lot of times we don't find out about some of these things until there's been a couple of incidences before local police or somebody finally get a hold of us.
Yeah. You imagine the realtor trying to sell that house? And by the way, there's a bear that comes here every day.
He
looking
comes for
food.
dinner, you know.
Yeah, just
You might want to keep the kids inside.
So if
gotta-
people really love these animals, they won't feed them.
right.
Because they're creating behaviors that can cause them to be doomed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotta wrap it up, huh?
Yeah, it's about that time.
Well, I'd like to thank Director Normando and, Executive Director Normando and Director Rick Olson for showing up tonight and talking about some fish and game stuff. I think it was good that we talked about that lawsuit, because I'm sure a lot of landowners are a little bit nervous about that, and rightfully so. Next week, we have... oh man, I just blanked out. That was really good.
Must be a huge guest.
No, no, she's not that big.
Okay.
Representative Jeanine Nodder and a governor candidate. And why I'm forgetting her name? I've known her forever.
Huh.
I'm gonna have to shoot myself. What?
Karen Testerman.
Karen Testament. Thank you. Karen Testament. We're going to talk again about the family, but it's a little bit different angle this time. Just for my own sake, I got legislation in this year, and I think I can count on your guys' support for hand grenade hunting for white-tailed deer.
Oh, so we'd go in the akin of like fish shooting in Vermont? and
Yeah,
things
like
that,
fish
yeah.
shooting in Vermont, but hand grenade, not the pineapple ones, because those are inhumane according to the Geneva Convention. But the pineapple,
M80 fishing for Atlantic salmon. Is
Yeah,
the
that
sort
kind of thing.
you'd
Sounds
come
exciting.
up
I've never hunted, but that sounds cool. I'm in.
But you got to make sure, if it's a kid doing it, they got a good enough arm to get it far enough away so they don't get killed with it. But other than that,
Fair enough. All right.
thank you, gentlemen.
with? Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. You're all right.
Thanks, Gary.